So thank you for joining us this early afternoon for this lunch panel on regime meltdown, new powers, and the failure of arms control. It sounds pretty doom and gloom, but I think we're going to try and hopefully our panelists will have some good rather than bad news to share with us today. So basically what we're going to be talking about this afternoon is the architecture of peace and security, which was primarily constructed by the great powers of the 20th century. And today, in a world that's largely characterized by multipolarity and unilateralism, a lot of these arms control arrangements that have been in place for years are crumbling, some of the most important ones, if they haven't fallen apart already. So we, on this panel this afternoon, are going to look at the root causes for the failure of extant arms control arrangements and discuss some of the possible future scenarios for the future of these regimes, look at the roles of middle and emerging powers, look at international institutions and see if they might have a greater role to play. So there's a lot of a road to cover this afternoon, but hopefully with our discussions and with your questions, we'll have a really interesting and fruitful conversation. So we have a great panel with us this afternoon. Right to my immediate right is Professor Rory Medcalf, the head of the National Security College of the Australian National University. To his right, Dr. Manpreet Sethi, a distinguished fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies. To her immediate right is Dr. S. Paul Kapur, professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, who is also on detail at the State Department's policy planning staff for a while, I guess? A little while. And then to his right is Sang-Hyun Lee, a senior research fellow at the Department of Security Strategy Studies at the Sejong Institute. So thank you, all of you, for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. So I'm going to start with Dr. Kapur as the American at the table. So earlier in 2019, the U.S. withdrew from the INF Treaty, and a lot of the discussions that people in the arms control circles have been having is what that means for the future of New START. So I'd like to start with that question. What do you think is on the horizon for New START? What are the possibilities for renewal? What are the conversations that you're having around that? And anything else you'd like to add to kick off the panel would be great as well. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks for the question. Thanks to ORF for inviting me and for everybody for coming today. These are my own views, of course, not any kind of an official statement. So kind of setting the stage, I think in the U.S. view, arms control measures like INF or like New START, they're not an end in themselves. So they serve a particular strategic end, and they have to make the achievement of that end more likely. Or you could say they have to be fit for purpose. And if they're not, they may be not helpful or potentially could be unhelpful. So I think each potential agreement or treaty or institution or whatever is going to be evaluated in that manner. And if it doesn't actually serve that specific strategic purpose, the U.S. or any state might decide not to join it, or that it no longer wants to be part of it, or what have you. And I think that's why the U.S. left the INF, because because the Russians were not meeting their commitments under the treaty, and also because it didn't cover China, which were two big strategic ends that the United States had there. So because of that, the treaty wasn't serving its interests, and it left. And so with New START, I'm not going to try to predict whether it would be renewed. I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not going to try to guess. But I expect that the decision about whether to renew it would again turn on this question of whether it's actually helping to achieve the strategic goals that the United States sought when it initially joined the treaty. So what would those goals be? Well, one would be reducing major threats to stability in the international system. Strategic weapon systems, of course, can be very destabilizing. They can lead to arms races, highly destructive wars, and so on. And so limiting strategic systems can help reduce a major threat to international stability. and in doing so served the United States interests. And that was one of the things that the United States wanted in joining, or would want in joining, in renewing the treaty. But strategic systems aren't the only problem. Sub-strategic systems are a major problem as well. And states find them attractive for a number of reasons. They're less destructive than strategic systems, and so the decision to employ them is less momentous. They're somewhat more likely to be used, therefore, and they can potentially generate deterrence in a way that strategic systems, which are harder to use, might not. But even if they're less destructive, sub-strategic systems are still dangerous. They can do considerable damage themselves. They can start an escalatory process that could result potentially all the way up to result in a strategic exchange even. All right. So sub-strategic systems then are a major source of instability, and restraining their development is going to be an important U.S. goal. And I think one question the United States is going to ask then is what's the impact on sub-strategic systems? Is there one? Is it promoting our goals here? And with New Start focuses on strategic warheads, right? It doesn't focus on sub-strategic systems. So the answer there is going to be no, okay? Because that's not what the treaty does. A second question that would be asked in evaluating a treaty like New Start is whether it addresses major U.S. competitors. Which countries are the primary competitors of the United States, both in terms of the weapon systems that I just talked about, and also more broadly in terms of the full range of our security interests? One answer is Russia, and New Start does address Russian weapons. So the treaty kind of checks that box. But Russia isn't the only state that poses a major threat to U.S. strategic interests. There's a second state that does so, and that state is China. Growing Chinese capabilities threaten to deny the U.S. and other regional states access to significant portions of the Indo-Pacific region. And avoiding an outcome like that and maintaining open access is one of the United States' major strategic goals. So to serve strategic interests, a treaty like New Start would have to address Chinese capabilities and reduce the likelihood that China could use them to restrict access in the Indo-Pacific region. So would New Start do that? The answer is no there also, right? So I don't know whether the treaty is going to be renewed. I imagine the elections will have some impact on that. And even if there was a second Trump administration, I wouldn't want to guess what decision would be made. But I think the thought processes that the administration would go through would be similar to the ones I laid out for you, and they turn on that question that I posed at the beginning, which is, does this serve the strategic interests that we sought in joining this treaty, and specifically looking at sub-strategic systems and also major state competitors.
Thank you. I might ask one follow-up question. Sure. Do you think that any, a renewed New Start, maybe another INF somewhere down the road, will require Chinese participation in order to be successful?
Yeah, I think the Chinese have to be part of any conversation that we have. Is my sense, yeah. Because to ignore China is to ignore kind of one of the major, if not the major, strategic concerns that we have. So if you're trying to come up with arms control agreements that actually have a purpose and that aren't being done just to sort of do them, it has to address China, I think.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, I'd like to go to you and give us a little bit of your view on what is underway on the Korean Peninsula. What do you think are maybe the challenges and opportunities on the Korean Peninsula, especially obviously with North Korea? Do you think there's any potential breakthrough here for talks between the U.S. and North Korea? Right now, it sort of doesn't seem likely, but I'd be interested in your take on that.
Well, it may be the case that North Korea maybe one of the sub-strategic issue that Paul just mentioned. But think about the North Korean nuclear issue. The problem began early 1990s. We are in the 2020. It's almost 3 decades old problem. The future, I don't expect many good things because we already know that North Korea has no indication that they will give up its nuclear weapon sooner or later. So why the problem is so difficult? Looking back at just a few years ago, in 2017, the situation on the Korean Peninsula was quite intense because of the a possible military action against the DPRK from the United States, like a bloody nose strike action. But 2018, suddenly things have changed completely. Donald Trump, U.S. President Trump, and Kim Jong Un had the two summit meetings, and also South Korean President Moon Jae-in met Kim Jong Un 3 times. So in 2018, we had a very optimistic and high expectation about the solution of the problem. But 2019, again, we back to the old attention. In 2020, perhaps we don't have many reasons to believe there will be breakthrough because U.S. and North Korean perception about the complete denuclearization and the regime security guarantee that North Korea demand. There's a huge gap. For example, what does the complete denuclearization mean? From U.S. perspective, that means that North Korea must give up completely both weapons, materials, and infrastructure. But North Korea have a little different idea. They said it is denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, not North Korea. Okay, meaning that U.S. nuclear umbrella and U.S. Strategic military action against the North Korea, and also part of that is the U.S. South Korea joint military exercise. All these should be gone. So can you accept that? And also part of the reason that the deal is difficult like this. How can we actually implement the denuclearization? Would it be once and for all measure or just step-by-step approach? Because North Korea always claimed that because of the lack of confidence between US and DPRK, they prefer step-by-step, small deal style negotiation. But as you mentioned, the US position is just like a CVID, complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. So still, if you look at that, we still have a huge gap between North Korea and the international community. And that's why I'm saying that we don't have much reason to believe there will be breakthrough sooner or later. And also, what North Korea has claimed for giving up their nuclear weapon is that completely stop U.S. hostile policy against them. So politically, militarily, and economically, the U.S. should prove that they don't treat North Korea as an enemy or hostile anymore. So it will not be easy challenge. Okay, so I don't know. I don't have a very clear answer about the possibility of solving this problem. Perhaps we can expect that. Who knows? Trump's love letter may be doing some good things about changing Kim Jong's mind. Okay, let me stop you.
I mean, just a follow-up question on that. I mean, do you think countries like South Korea, really expect the United States to remain a steward of nuclear arms control if Trump won a second term?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, I strongly support arms control agreement and arms control regime should be maintained in the future. Well, frankly, in South Korea, inside the South Korea, there are some people say that we must have our own nuclear weapon to cope with North Korean nuclear weapon. But the solution should be denuclearization, not more weapons on the Korean Peninsula. And also because that while Trump was on the campaign trail, he hinted the possibility that he will allow South Korea and Japan to have a nuclear weapon. I think that's kind of a big mistake. It gives a wrong impression that United States may be treating this non-proliferation regime too lightly. And also, in order to push hard and to make some common front against the North Korean nuclear threat, the U.S. must be the champion of the non-proliferation regime. That's my response.
Thank you. Dr. Sethi, I'd like to go to you and broaden the conversation a little bit and bring India into the discussion. What is your view on India's approach to the future of arms control, and what do you think is going to make arms control agreements most difficult in the future?
Okay, thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to have this opportunity of sharing some views. And I'm glad, Rachel, that you started with Professor Kapur. The US pretty much sets the fashion on the nuclear street, and we find also on arms control, the kind of atmosphere that gets created with what happens in the US does percolate down to all the other nuclear armed states. Um, Now, traditionally, India has been a non entity on the arms control circuit, really, as far as bilateral nuclear arms control has been concerned. On several of the multilateral issues, yes, India has been a voice. But because it's traditionally been an outsider on this field, even a critic sometimes of the idea that arms control is taking away attention from disarmament, because universal elimination of nuclear weapons is what India's been campaigning for. And there was that general feeling that the focus on arms control then takes away some of the attention that needs to be paid to disarmament. But I think in recent times, we've gotten over that kind of a feeling. And while it's a very marginal voice right now, but I think there is an understanding that nuclear arms control serves a purpose. What we see happening in the global environment between the US and Russia now, as I see it, it's a loss of an anchor or a template that you had, which could have been internalized by several other nuclear dyads, and that is being lost. That habit of engagement between countries that don't trust each other, that has been lost, and there is a growing feeling that it's a situation of free for all now. Um, it's not necessary that loss of nuclear arms control must necessarily translate into a nuclear arms race. I think that correlation might not turn out to be true, but there is that general sense or that feeling that there is no restraints of any kind, and therefore each country is trying to find its own way of what strategic stability is going to, how it's going to play out for them. Since Paul said that countries decide whether it's in their own strategic interest to move into any kind of an arms control, when I was looking at what India's interests would be, I think yes, the risks exist, the nuclear risks exist, considering that we are in a highly nuclearized neighborhood, and these need to be addressed. Nuclear disarmament is not on the anvil. I don't think anybody's holding their breath for anything of that nature to happen. And nuclear arms control, therefore, of some kind could be a useful perch before you move on to, and this could also be in terms of trust building between nations. But I wouldn't call it nuclear arms control. I think that's a rather constricted, restrained way of looking at, I think, what we are essentially aiming at, which is managing nuclear relations better in order to have some kind of a strategic predictability rather than this environment of free for all. So, in order to move in that direction, and if we call it managing nuclear relations, it will not be the classical nuclear arms control of what we've seen in the past. So, it will not be ceilings on weapon systems or about numbers. In any case, the what's happening now is more about technologies than about numbers, and therefore that'll be, I think, a difference that we see. So while we continue to refer to it as nuclear arms control because we haven't coined a word which will be meaningful enough to say what we want to say about this, but it'll be more about understanding each other's doctrines, threat perceptions, in order to avoid possibilities of misperception and miscalculation in this free for all environment. Now, since India can't do it alone, I mean, arms control by its very nature has to be between two or more partners. The problems that I think we face, and generally when I speak to the strategic community in India, the sense that, often the question that's thrown back at you is, but do we have enough to start talking about controls? And the other thing is the problem that we have with, as I say, with China, there is the attitude problem because they still don't recognize you as a nuclear weapon state and not willing to engage in any kind of a strategic dialogue on doctrines or any of these other issues. And with Pakistan, there's a huge trust problem. So even though India and Pakistan have some of the best nuclear CBMs between two nuclear nations, there's very little trust between the two nations. Also, the problem that some countries, and particularly India, faces that with both our neighbors, is where they believe that by having some sense of strategic instability, you're actually enhancing deterrence. So, brinksmanship, or the idea that, if I can have a relationship which is unstable, so without any kind of arms control of any kind, that is good for deterrence rather than bad for deterrence. So when there is no shared sense of the risks that are being created by the kind of capability buildup that's happening in the region, that then undercuts any possibility of arms control. So as I see it, and I'm not speaking for the government at all, as I see it, arms control is something that India must engage with. We have to find ways of how we are going to do it with our neighbors. And since it'll be more meaningful to do something with China, who is really not interested in any arms control, not with the US and certainly not with India, that's where the biggest hurdle will be. So if China was to come into some kind of an agreement at the global level, I think, of which India is also a part, I find that might be a way of easing the situation in the region.
So just to follow up, it seems like a lot of the time people, I think over the last 6 or so months, have been talking about a new arms race. Do you think that's a little bit alarmist?
See, we were essentially talking about three countries who are in the nuclear
exactly.
arms race. They are the ones who have the financial, capability to do it and the technological wherewithal to do it. So there are these three countries. And the interesting thing is, while we say that China is in a nuclear arms race, they're doing nuclear modernization, they justify it by suggesting that we are actually restoring strategic stability, which has been destroyed by what actions have been taken by the US. So you have these different views on that issue. There are differentials of all kinds which are playing out, and that's. So, as we've all said, China is such an important voice on this issue, and since he's missing at the table, we are all. He's back now. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So we don't have to speak for them, but that's my general sense, that the power differentials between nations is so different, and their sense of what is strategic stability and what is restoring strategic stability is so different, that that's where the problem comes in on this.
Thank you. Okay, Professor Medcalf, I'm going to hop over to you. So based on what we've heard so far, does the glass seem half full or half empty? And in your opinion, what are the roles that middle powers can play in the future of arms control?
Thanks, Rachel. Look, a few thoughts just to, I guess, add some texture to the conversation. I'm someone who probably would be defined as a lapsed disarmer. I was quite involved in a lot of the disarmament initiatives that Australia supported over the years, and of course had a little bit of hope for what the Obama administration was trying to achieve in quite a different strategic environment a decade ago. But I think we have to be realistic and acknowledge that this is an era where coexistence and arms control really are our best bets. It's really quite unrealistic to be pursuing, I think, disarmament visions at the moment unless we can establish some of the predictability, I wouldn't say trust, but predictability through a coexistence package, a combination of arms control, confidence building and deterrence. And really those are the first steps before we can think about bigger ambitions. So that's, I guess, the background I bring to the conversation. I do think, however, that we need to shy away a little bit from the very creative and lurid title that this session has about regime meltdown and essentially the complete failure of arms control, because things could be a hell of a lot worse. If you look in our region, if you look at in the Indo-Pacific where we're sitting at the moment, we don't have a fully fledged arms race, so let's not pretend that we do. We don't have nations dramatically increasing the proportion of GDP they're spending on military capabilities. Yes, we have assertive military modernisation, particularly in China, that I think needs to be much better explained to the region, its purposes and its nature. But things could yet be worse. So I think we should focus at this stage on holding the line and on looking a little bit beyond the very important but essentially 20th century problems that we've inherited about nuclear arms control, and look as well at a much wider range of capabilities that are going to be destabilising in the years ahead. So I'd say the opportunity for middle powers here, like Australia, first step is to be, I think, very realistic about what we can bring to the table and not to get too distracted by utopian visions of global nuclear abolition at this stage, but focus much more on the here and now. Remember that middle powers have interests too, and many of those middle powers are concerned by anyone's unilateralism, but particularly in the Indo-Pacific by Chinese military power, and therefore are going to want to protect their strategic interests while they're engaging in the arms control conversation. Thirdly, middle powers like Australia, I think, need to look beyond the nuclear horizon and look at the new technologies, look at cyber, look at artificial intelligence, look at robotics, look at what we can do to encourage a global conversation on norms and on, I guess, the sorts of understandings that are the beginnings of arms control. Remember, these technologies are where nuclear arms control was in the 1950s. In other words, essentially a blank space, huge amount of work ahead, but progress to be made. And last of all, I think that one of the best things middle powers can simply do is to build their own capability to engage as credible players in the arms control, confidence building, and other conversations that are needed internationally. And that is, it's relatively cheap to build the diplomatic expertise in these areas. And I think a lot of countries like Australia have let their expertise run down over the years. So we really need to rebuild the expertise. Also, to be a credible player in arms control, you need to often have a bit of capability of your own. So in fact, the fact that cyber and a number of the newer technologies are open not only to great powers, but to middle powers as well, gives us, in a sense, a reason not only to be the victims of these capabilities, but to wield them ourselves. And that then gives us, I think, more effectiveness and more credibility when we try to help manage the situation. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we have a new panelist joining us. Very lucky to have him be able to join the panel a few minutes late. Dr. Dingli Shen from Fudan University in China. And so I wanted to bring the conversation over to you, if that's okay. I asked this question before, but now that you're at the table, I'd like to ask it again. We were talking a little bit about the future of arms control arrangements, and if China wants to be a part of that, and if they, in order to be credible, would sort of require Chinese participation. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm sorry to be late for some reason. And I'm glad to be able to return. As one of the key members of the international community, China can benefit from a world order which is stable, peaceful, and predictable, which is ruled by law. China should not only integrate into the world system, but also can help to improve the world system. Should not only complain that the order is not good, China can also work with others to make it good. Therefore, at a certain point of time, China should not just feel gloomy, this arms control regime not good. So I would be negative. China may propose some positive arms control regime that fits its interest and the interest of many others, including America and India. So some may say, why China refused to join INF? Look, you are a superpower of INF, and US, Russia, zero. It's unfair. So they invited China for a multilateral, not just a bilateral, new INF control regime. We need to understand, others feel the world order not good. Therefore, they think someone can help us to make it good. And China said no. And many feel gloomy. Why you say no? I think the reason is China may think this is a one arms control in a certain category. What about other category? That would make me feel free of threat of the trend, some trend by some pro-independence people in Taiwan. And we have our sovereignty to touch Taiwan. That is our right. And before we attain our right, we feel insecure. And we don't have an arms control regime that would reduce the US and the Russian strategic weapon to the level of that of China. So China feels it is insecure. We don't have another category of arms control like aircraft carrier to reduce Americans 12 to 2 that China is having now. We don't have an arms control regime to control the quality and quantity of stealth jet fighters or bombers, to control the number of US F-22, F-35 to the level of China's J-20, not to compare the difference of quality. So China wants to increase its superiority in one category to offset its inferiority in other areas. This is how China manages its national security. But this could be viewed by some others, like India. China has 2 aircraft carriers. China has certain its homemade jet fighters, which is stealth fighter, and others do not have. So it's quite complicated. To bring China into one category of arms control, China would think you reduce my superiority in this, while your superiority in others have not been controlled. But to do global, overarching, conventional and unconventional arms control is not realistic. You have to do one by one. So in my view, all stakeholders need to come together to talk rather than not to talk. If track 1 cannot proceed right now, what about track 2 or 1.5 or something like this? The Indian government sponsor and the Indian foundation would make it happen and bring American officials and a few professors from China to speak, and the Chinese embassy people would watch. And it's broadcast live, so anyone in the world can see. This may not remove our suspicion and difference, but this could be helpful to reduce the level of distrust. So someday China may understand that I am ready to participate if you can also do some self-restraint. So this is what I would respond to our organizers. Be slow to say no, and be ready to say, let's talk. And to talk may not resolve any problem, but not to talk could generate possibly more problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Kapur, I wanted to turn it to you one more time. And because I can bring NATO into literally any conversation I have, I'd like to bring it into this one as well. So the NATO Secretary General had made an arms control speech back in October, a major one, which I think was the first that a NATO Secretary General has given in something like a decade. So do you see a greater role for international institutions like NATO in arms control, or do you think that those are institutions that can obviously opine on these issues but stay sort of on the sidelines?
I think they can certainly facilitate progress in these areas, but NATO itself, doesn't join treaties or anything like that, so it's not going to be party to any arms control agreements. An institution like NATO can facilitate collective action of like-minded states in support of arms control through dialogue, consultation, coordination, and so on. And I think those are important. I mean, those things can help promote the goals of restraint regimes, and NATO does those types of things now. But I don't know that to use a NATO example, I don't know that it's actually going to get more involved in promoting arms control in the years ahead. I think members would have to be like-minded about that issue, because the alliance operates by consensus, and so everybody would have to agree on any new position taken or activities supported. In deciding whether to do this, the key question for them would be, I think, the one that I highlighted earlier when I was talking about New Start, which is, does this activity promote the strategic interests of the states in question? I think right now, states within NATO have different views about how involved in arms control NATO should get. Some want NATO to be more supportive of arms control, and others want the alliance to stick to more traditional kind of defensive roles. And I don't know that that's going to change, and that we're going to get real consensus on change to support more arms control in NATO anytime soon. I wouldn't assume that that's going to happen, but whatever happens, it's going to be a result of that central question. They're going to have to answer that for themselves.
Okay, thanks. So I could ask questions for another hour, but we don't have that time. We only have about 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure to bring in the audience because I'm sure everyone here has excellent questions to ask as well. So I would like to open it up to audience questions. Like I said, we have about 30 minutes. I'll take 2 or 3 at a time, and you can address them to the entire panel, address them to specific members of the panel. But if there's anyone that wants to get started with that, I will go ahead and call on you. Yes? Yep, okay.
Everyone's comments were very.
Sorry, can you introduce yourself, please?
Ravi Batra, Chair, National Advisory Council, South Asian Affairs, United States. And my questions are in my personal capacity. I heard everyone's comments, and Kazakhstan's first president, Nazarbayev, issued a 21st Century Manifesto, Beyond Denuclearization to War on War, which was my nickname for his manifesto. But the Chinese statement, which my distinguished neighbor on the table just made, that China is concerned, is afraid of certain inferiorities in certain areas, and therefore needs superiority in this, while not defined, but hypersonics or whatever. My question to China would be, how is China so certain that it will have superiority in this third stage? I mean, at some point, some scientist may come up with, the capacity to open a wormhole and, suck in like a vacuum cleaner whatever's flying. So technology has no limits. And ultimately, unless human beings find a way to have verifiable trust with each other, how else can you ever manage this?
I thought I saw another one over here.
Hello, my name is Teresa Novotná. I am academic based in Berlin and also collaborate with Europeum, which is a think tank based in Prague, my hometown. In my academic research, I work on Korean Peninsula, so I have a question for Dr. Lee. In the project, I focus on the role of the EU in the Korean affairs. And one of the things I've been trying to argue is that in case you want to have a deal with North Korea, you need to sort of multilateralize it, and you need some entity to basically provide the guarantee for that to stick. In a way, we've heard that in the speech by Minister Zarif, that the problem for him is that he had a deal with the US. So why would he want to go just for a deal with Donald Trump, right? So basically, the problem is of the trust and some kind of guarantee for any agreement. And so in my research, I was trying to see how Europe, how the EU could play this role of a guarantor, facilitator. So I would be very much interested in your perspective on that. And if I may, just a quick additional question. Around the New Year, everyone was obviously expecting the Christmas gift from North Korea. So I was just wondering, what do you think why we didn't get any? Why did Kim Jong-un change his mind? Was it perhaps because of the China-Russia UN Security Council resolution still sort of circulating, or I don't know, it was just Kim Jong-un trolling Donald Trump? Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Lee and Dr. Shen, I would ask you to address those two questions if possible. Thank you.
Well, I cannot represent China. I'm just one voice from many voices in China. To my American neighbor, my few points. One is, indeed, technology has no limit. But that's no reason we should not be in the forefront. Second, China does not seek dominance, but China feels a threat of my neighbor's dominance that generate a fundamental threat to us, because that country invented the UN but is unwilling to observe the rule of the UN. It made a Taiwan Relation Act, and last year made a number of other repetitive acts to rampantly step into China's internal affairs by selling weapons to Taiwan and allowing mutual pursuing of naval ships, etc. As long as U.S. admits that Taiwan is a part of China, this kind of action, which is not accorded by a rule-based world order, would drive China to seek to approach to the forefront of technology. But even if we can achieve the limit, we would not seek to dominate, to use the same way, not to observe the UN Charter, and to militarily threat another major power. This is one Chinese response, not China's response.
Thank you.
Well, it's very glad to hear that EU has some interest in helping denuclearizing North Korea. So my response is like this. We try to multilateralize the negotiation, but the North Korean position is quite straightforward. They always said that they developed a nuclear weapon because of US hostile policy toward them. So denuclearization is the business strictly discussed between US and DPRK. China, North Korea even does not believe China. So it's kind of a quite embarrassing situation. We would like to engage multilaterally, and also we try to invite other key players in this negotiation to give some more confidence to North Korea. But still is North Korea who continues to refuse this offer. So that's why this negotiation is so difficult to convince North Korea that if North Korea accepts that multilateral engagement, they have a better chance of solving the problem, as well as getting some more benefit from this negotiation. So going back to the U.S. hostile policy, they always say that politically, the U.S. must stop to treat North Korea as a rogue regime and treat it as a normal country and respect its sovereignty. Okay, in the security area, you know that North Korean Peninsula is based on the temporary armistice treaty since the Korean War. So this temporary peace must be replaced by more permanent peace treaty. That's the security part. And economically, U.S. must lift the sanctions to make North Korea to live its own capability. So why North Korea then didn't bring Christmas gift? He mentioned repeatedly since last year. This year, we many North Korean watching Seoul are theorizing that Kim Jong-un may have concerned quite much about what kind of gift he should give. But he must also have some expectation that what he'll get in return for that Christmas gift. You are maybe familiar with what Trump said. What kind of the gift is ready to treat it. So perhaps giving some nasty Christmas gift to Trump may be a quite difficult decision from Kim Jong-un's point of view. And also this year interestingly, every first day of January, North Korea announced this the so-called New Year's speech. This year they didn't announce it. Instead, they convened the party plenum and announced a important decision. So the key point of that announcement is that North Korea will continue its own way until U.S. completely stop its hostile policy and peace regime on the Korean Peninsula is established. So meaning that their confrontation will be a very long-term game, which will not be stopped, just 1 year or a decade. And one final comment is that we all know that what happened to one of Iran's military leader, Soleimani, by a U.S. military drone. So perhaps I think that's quite a significant signal to Kim Jong-un. If you do not behave well, perhaps your fate may be similar to that. I think that's why Kim Jong-un these days, he must be pretty much cautious and pretty much concerned about what kind of option he can choose in dealing with Donald Trump. So despite that, as I mentioned earlier, North Korea will not give up nuclear weapon in a couple of years. But at the same time, I would say he will not watch carefully what will be the red line that so that he cannot cross that red line.
Thank you. All right, other questions in the audience?
Thank you. Salma Baba, Professor for European Studies at the Nehru University in New Delhi. Rory, I want to take a point you said right in the very end about new technologies. And as we discuss arms control and regulating nuclear weapons, I mean, we're living in a world of hybrid threats. The nuclear club is limited with all the value of deterrence to those players who have it and to deter those who may want to. But the collateral damage which can be imposed by cyber attack is far more than what you would have to plan, organize, and deploy with nuclear. So, I mean, have we not really taken into account the total game changing which is happening? Because that is a technology which, without any checks and balances, is available to all, is as civilian as it comes, and it can be as lethal as you want to make it. All it requires is one malware to be written. So are we really caught in a different architecture of time and not accepting that warfare has dramatically changed while we still trash out where the comma and the full stop should come, in any of these deals? We're really not talking about, no state is secure. Deterrence of the kind is over. You're actually super vulnerable. And it doesn't matter, even a friend or, let's bring it in. I mean, arms control and all of it is only between states. Your non-state actor has become extremely powerful. So is this a redundant conversation?
Professor Medcalf and Dr. Sethi, I'd actually ask both of you to respond to that if possible.
Nobody wants to answer that question because, no, look, I mean, you make an excellent point, and I think you emphasise the complexity of what we're dealing with. And I don't claim to be a specialist on cyber, and in fact, I think there are others. I think some of the conversations last night, for example, you had some great cyber experts in the room. But what I would say is none of these technologies can be treated in isolation. So you talk about hybrid threats. I think we're all grappling with how do we, I guess, factor cyber into the whole architecture of deterrence and arms control. And just as an aside, I mentioned that in a way it helps to have capability in order to be able to be a player in arms control. Australia itself, some years ago, was one of the first countries to not only acknowledge an offensive cyber capability, but to say that there are circumstances in which we might use it. Now, how do we square that with being a good citizen? That's another question. I would say that, just to emphasise my starting point, that this is an area where not only foreign ministries, but also defence ministries, cooperation with the private sector, we need to be developing really middle powers particularly have an opportunity to become really effective diplomatic players in this space, develop that capability that we can bring to bear when opportunities arise, whether it's after a particular cyber attack or the threat of a cyber attack, to really advance the conversation on norms. One big question for us to take away is whether this is better done in inclusive multilateral conversations, or whether the starting point should be small coalitions of relatively like-minded countries building common understandings about norms first, because of the whole contested nature of the internet. I'll hand it to India at that stage.
No, it's not India,
I
it's
know
an
what-
Indian. Yeah, but Professor Baba, thanks for bringing that strain into the conversation. You're very right. And history tells us that the character of warfare keeps changing every time a new technology gets injected into it. So the nuclear posture review of the US, for instance, now says that we will do nuclear retaliation against cyber attacks on our assets. So that's how countries address some of the threats that come up. And the problem with that is that that's not making nuclear weapons redundant. It's actually adding to the salience of nuclear weapons, because more scenarios are being created in which nuclear weapons will get used. So I don't think this conversation is useless, because these weapons are not going out of fashion in a hurry. In fact, what we are seeing today is that the salience of the weapon is at an all-time high. And many people see it as a poor man's weapon compared to the kind of technology races which will play out in the three major powers. In fact, if I may, since I have the floor, and we did start with the idea of gloom and doom,
Yes.
and if we don't want to leave with that feeling, from this room, I just wanted to talk about what have been the causes for the failure of this arms control. Why are we in this situation today? And perhaps there lie some pointers on what could be found as ways to get out of that situation. So one, of course, I think you would all agree, is the nature of the political relationship that we seem to be in, the interstate dynamics between the major players, which is devoid of all trust. And the word trust has come on, more than once on this table. This is leading to changed threat perceptions. And every country seems to be hedging against the uncertainties that could appear. And certainly emergence of new technologies is one of that uncertainty that countries are hedging against, which is why we heard, from Mr. Shen that why should we not be at the forefront of technology? So countries are not going to stop in that race. The BMD is a very good example of having upset some amount of sense of strategic stability that had been created in the past. And with the US BMD, then China and Russia feel the need to have countermeasures. So hypersonics is where they are going. And hypersonic missiles, even if all they're bringing to the table is more speed and maneuverability, some things that we've also seen with the existing missile systems, these are coming in states which are nuclear armed. Which have trust deficits of the order that they have. And therefore, the chances of miscalculation, misperception, going up the escalation ladder, I think very much remains. There's a predominance of not just nationalist. We heard someone in the morning session say nationalism is not essentially bad. But what we are seeing is not just nationalism, it's hyper-nationalism today, where me-first syndrome for every nation is particularly important. And therefore, we've reached a stage where there's zero-sum thinking on security issues. So there's a loss of understanding that deterrence is essentially based on mutual vulnerability. And what we see technology is giving you the ability to move towards absolute security. And that, I think, is a major problem that has brought us to this situation. Besides, of course, something that we ignore always, and that is the fractious domestic political environment in most of these countries, where there is no consensus on these issues. And therefore, everyone feels that if I make a concession, the opposition is going to take it up as a sellout of the nation. And in democracies particularly, I think this is a problem. So how do we get out of this situation? I think, one, better political relations. No brainer. If we had better political relations, that would be the best. And the irony is that the less you have better relations, the more you need some kind of managing of strategic relations. Secondly, if there were better understanding of dangers, I don't think political leaders or even the public across countries understands the dangers of what could happen as a part of inadvertent escalation. I don't see a deliberate nuclear war playing out between nations. I think we all understand what that'll do. But inadvertent escalation because of miscalculation, misperception is certainly very much there. And without that understanding in the political leadership, and as I said, there are countries which believe that having that sense of risk is actually good for deterrence. So you're actually taking risks, believing that you can manage those risks, but then they could very quickly run out of hand. And one way of increasing that understanding of dangers, I think, is if we were to, perhaps go back to the Cold War experience, where you had for instance, Hollywood movies giving you, things like The Day After, which explain to people. So you're not talking about abstract numbers being vaporized in minutes, but you're actually seeing your heroes, or love stories vaporizing. And therefore, your ability to connect with some of that would be much more. So popular imagination, if some of these issues could be brought into popular imagination through movies, literature, I think that could be one way of getting out of the situation.
Thank you. So we have a little over 10 minutes left in the panel. So I wanted to gather maybe 2 or 3 final questions to pose to our panel members, and then just sort of go down the line and offer some closing thoughts. So are there, there's one, let's see. Okay, one more question here. Is there anyone else that, just so that I'm aware of who to call on afterwards, if there's any other questions?
No,
okay.
The foreign minister of Iran gave many warm packages of love for the United States today. If he was here, and he's not here to defend himself, so I would take issue with each one of them in detail. But relevant to this conversation, and I don't know if you heard it, leaving aside that he adopted Justin Trudeau as a baby, his excuse for drowning the Ukrainian airlines. But the most important thing that he said today, which is relevant to this conversation, is that before they attacked US bases in Iraq, they notified the United States. And that even Iran does. Just like when the United States had a missile attack in Syria, there was information given to the recipients of the attack, so there'd be no human casualties. So actually, nations are pretty responsible actors. The problem I have with democracy is, and of course, it's the best thing we've got, is that what the foreign minister did today was treat the audience like a peanut gallery, and he hyped it up. And it's not helpful. And you're not going to get any arms control going unless global leaders start behaving like leaders and not talking to the peanut gallery.
Thank you. Dr. Sethi, you made a point where you don't see a scenario playing out where nuclear weapons would be used. We were sort of talking about this before the panel started, and I was saying that I'm curious about whether or not there is a situation in which a nuclear weapon could be fired off accidentally. We're talking about inadvertent escalation, miscalculation, and so I would be curious if anyone else on the panel can see a situation where that might happen. But I don't want to end on the doom and gloom note. So in your closing comments, if you could address that and our colleagues question over there, and then anything else that you think that we should take away from today's discussion would be great. And I'm going to do it backwards, and I'll start with Rory.
Thank you. Well, look, before I go to the doom and gloom of creative scenarios for destruction, and I think the good news is there's a huge amount of dystopian fiction out there at the moment, and dystopian television. So perhaps there's a bit of hope for your view that this might scare people into action. I think we've got to again look at some glass half full. I mean, if you look at the nuclear proliferation in the last 20 years, we're still essentially dealing with only the same 2 hard cases that we were dealing with 20 years ago, North Korea and Iran. So in a sense, the claim that the nuclearization of the overt nuclearization of India and Pakistan in 1998 would lead to this cascade of global proliferation hasn't happened. So again, there's a small sign that the system is possibly more stable than this idea of an arms control meltdown would suggest. Not, this is not a permanent condition perhaps, but it's something to hang on to. Second point though is that are there scenarios for nuclear use? I think we do have to bear in mind that there are probably a lot more breakpoints between if you like, a first skirmish in a crisis and the escalation to nuclear threats. I think countries are a lot more cautious, and leaders are a lot more cautious than some of their public utterances would suggest. It's difficult, for example, to see some sort of skirmish in the South China Sea leading automatically to US-China confrontation. That's the good news. Bring in, though, some of the more desperate actors, and I still wonder whether, for example, in a crisis between India and Pakistan. I still wonder very much what the Pakistani decision making would be in those circumstances. I still think if I was picturing a scenario where a nuclear weapon was used really quite recklessly, I'd see it as a tactical level Pakistani nuclear weapon, whether in warfare or in some sort of act of terrorism. If it was indeed taken by extremists from the Pakistani arsenal, they're the things I worry about. I think the US-China nuclear dynamic is going to become more stable over time, and I worry more about how it will mix up with those other hybrid threats.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, as I said, though one should never say never in this field, but deliberate use of nuclear weapons, no, I don't see scenarios where that might be used. But inadvertently, because of an accident, miscalculation, misperception, yes, the chances I think are high. 10 years ago, we were talking about the norm of non-use being a solid norm. I don't think any of us refers to it as a solid norm any longer. We understand that things could get murky. For instance, I mean, if a scenario was that you had between two nuclear weapon states a hypersonic missile being detected that it's coming towards you, but you don't know where it's going to hit and you don't know what it's carrying, what warhead it's carrying. So the ambiguity of destination and of warhead could lead to inadvertent escalation. Those are scenarios which are there. The idea of limited nuclear war, something that had gone out of fashion, I thought, before I got into the business of understanding nuclear strategy, is suddenly back in fashion. So the idea that there could be a low yield use of nuclear weapons, as he said, TNWs, and I don't see it happening only in the Pakistan-India scenario. It could happen in the US, or NATO-Russia scenario. Since the US now says that low yield use of nuclear weapons is where they are putting their money on in order to bridge the credibility gap and in this kind of a capability, the fact that escalate to de-escalate strategies are back in fashion, that's where I think the dangers are lying, and the possibility of inadvertent escalation, I think, is something that we should seriously worry about.
Over to you. Yeah.
Well, and the points that I agree with Rory and Manpreet that tactical use is in a situation where there's been a deployment with conventional forces into the field, probably some kind of pre-delegation at some point in a crisis. That's where you're most likely to get nuclear use, and I think that's part of the reason why the U.S. is worried about sub-strategic systems, is because that's where really the action is in terms of the risk. I guess my big point here is that arms control regimes can be good, they can be indifferent, they could potentially be counterproductive. You have to judge each one of them against the purpose for which it was designed and weigh the effects against that purpose. And to the extent that there's been kind of a meltdown, like the topic was talking about, or arms control regimes or treaties have failed and states have walked away, it's been because there was a judgment that there was a disconnect between the effects and the purpose, and so these agreements or regimes weren't doing what they were supposed to do. But I don't think that means that the door is closed. I mean, even actors, states that have walked away, like the United States, in some situations, I think would be willing to get into other arms control agreements or potentially renew them. But that standard would have to be met, right? The standard between purpose and effect.
Thanks. Dr. Lee, cheer us up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the title of this session is Regime Meltdown. I think it can't be more relevant because of the few things happened last year. It's not just in arms control like INF. We know that U.S. worked out the Paris Climate Agreement. Yesterday's your panel, many people talked about that climate change is one of the immediate threat that we face. And because of the U.S. withdrawal, perhaps climate regime may be weakened substantially in the future. And also, we see that this year we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of NPT, but still we believe there are many loopholes in that system. And perhaps we will continue to discuss how can we make this regime stronger and more solid. And also in nuclear security area, think about why U.S. President Barack Obama inaugurated nuclear security summit. Because we have to control the spread of a dangerous fissile material like a highly enriched uranium and plutonium. But after 3 rounds, it's gone. So we lost the momentum. So why are we witnessing the weakening of the regimes all over the world? Perhaps maybe the part of the reason may be that the so-called return of geopolitics, or every country is trying to prioritize its own national interest. So because of that, we see relatively rule-based international order is also weakening. So I would say that usually the reputation of a regime is decided by who's in it and who's supported. So in that sense, I would say the role of great powers like US, China, Russia is quite important to maintain these regimes.
Thank you. Dr. Shen, I might finish with you. Glass half full, glass half empty.
Thank you very much. As I miss 50% of this conversation,
Okay.
I would only say that each and every actor may be rational. They have a reason, rationale, to behave this way. But the entire traffic can be chaotic, not rational. Treaty makes all rational actors to abandon some individualistic rationality, but to forge a collective rationality. That's not easy. That need a big country like a US, Russia to keep its leadership role, not to quit these hard-made international arms control treaties. And that also urge a rising country like Japan, not Japan, India, China, to do whatever they can do. Pay certain cost, but gain more through international cooperation. This is what I want to say, but I don't know how to make it.
Thank you. We're ending on hopefully sort of a positive note. Thank you for attending. Could everyone join me in thanking our panelists as well? Enjoy the rest of your time at Raisina.
Navigation, freedom navigation is that.
There you are. Thank you.